I'm Louise Bedford. I'm the host of the Talking Trading podcast. Each week, we aim to bring you expert interviews and give you our thoughts about how to trade strategically and help you work out what, when, where, and how to trade. This week, it's a very special occasion. I am not only joined by my co-host, Christopher Tate, which is always fun, but also this is our 400th episode. I'm so excited. Over the years, since 2014, we've brought you interviews with Olympians, incredible sports people, mountain climbers, market wizards, authors, people who have your best interests at heart to see you excel in the markets. And we're going to keep doing just that. You know, the aim with everything that we're doing at Talking Trading is to provide you with inspiration. Let's have a look at the research about inspiration. There are three main characteristics of inspiration: evocation, transcendence, and approach motivation. So to translate, inspiration comes from something outside yourself and it transcends the ordinary. It gives you a new awareness and it generates a vision of yourself that is vivid and concrete, and it goads you into action. And that is everything that we're aiming to do at Talking Trading. And it's so essential that you seek out inspiration from different sources. You know, the difficulty is when you're going through the motions, if you don't have enthusiasm and joy in what you're doing, you can run out of energy and you can just drift along, and that's not what we want for you. So I think with this episode, which is a very special episode, and it really does bring me joy to bring this to you, what we're going to do is look at when things go brilliantly and things don't go well, the cognitive biases that we can be subject to that can not only strip away our motivation, but they can also mean that we're not seeing the market objectively. That's what we're going to discuss on Talking Trading today. And if you'd like to watch a video of this episode, subscribe to our YouTube channel. This is really important because that way you'll be updated when we absolutely drop new information and resources onto the channel. And our YouTube channel is youtube.com/trading game. Christopher Tate, how are you today?
I'm good. It's been a while, hasn't it?
It has. You've been a busy bee. It's been wonderful to see you pop so many of your videos onto YouTube, and having you back on Talking Trading is fantastic. So tell us about the topic today and let's get rolling.
I'm going to talk about what I consider to be probably my observation of the top 10 cognitive biases that I've observed in myself and others over the decades. Now, by no means is this list definitive. The number of biases that humans are prone to could fill a phone book. And it's simply a function of the way our brains have been put together. We're not designed as machines. We're designed as instruments who filter all the things we see and do and perceive through a selection of filters. And those filters represent not only our cognitive ability, but our background, our experience, things we picked up from others. We are far from perfect automatons when it comes to trading by any stretch of the imagination. So this is just my sort of top 10. What I'll do is go through what they are, how they occur in traders, and things that you can do to begin to overcome them, or at least be aware of them, because awareness is the first stage in overcoming these damn things. So what I'll do now is I will share my screen and go to full screen, because as is my wont, I have PowerPoint slides.
For those of you watching on YouTube, you'll be able to see those slides. So it'd be great if you can check out the show notes on talkingtrading.com.au to see that YouTube video and also see it on our channel.
This is probably my favourite bias, and it's the reason I put it as number one, this notion of the narrative fallacy. That humans are simply hairless apes that tell stories to one another. And the thing with our storytelling is that what we try and do is craft a narrative to fit events. And we also tend to craft this narrative to fit our perception and our perspective of the world. And this is particularly true in trading, where one of the key sources of information that people turn to are analyst reports. The thing about an analyst report is it's merely the analyst story. It's not the story of the market. It's the analyst perception of their story. And one of the things that I think people don't realize is that stockbroking or advisory is split into two arms. There is analysis, and these are the people who produce these reports, and then there is dealing or sales. The analyst report is a sales script. That's what it is designed for. It doesn't uncover any brilliant new information. It doesn't tell us anything new. It's simply a story. Humans are not built to process data. We're built to process stories. And you can understand why this is so, because before the joys of Excel and all these other tools we use to communicate data, people used to sit around and tell one another stories. This was the way we communicated. It's the way we passed on information. So you can see why this is deeply embedded in us and why it is crafted into our psychology. It is welded on. And this is the problem with many of these biases. They are actually welded onto us. And the problem with the narrative fallacy is there's no way your story influences the market and what it will do. I know people think it does. I know a lot of traders have an overinflated sense of their own importance, but you need to assume that your vote doesn't count. Yes, you do get to vote, and your vote may be that you will buy something. It doesn't mean that the rest of the market agrees with your story and votes in the same way. And you need to be prepared for this as an eventuality, because as a trader, one of the things that will happen with monotonous regularity is the market will not agree with your story and it will do something else. And so you either have to revise your story, drop your story, or simply listen to what the market is telling you.
And some of it can even be that you need to become aware of that story in the first place, because we can't tackle that which we're not aware of. And that in itself is a lesson in objectivity.
And that's the thing. And the only way you achieve this objectivity is by being mechanistic. If you don't have a mechanical approach to the way your trading works, then the only influences you have are other people's stories that you adapt and adopt for yourself. And that in no way reflects reality at all. You're getting second and third hand news and opinion. And this is why I'm always amazed that people hang around internet chat forums and listen to people talking about the potential impact of drilling results or new sales figures or whatever. Market doesn't care. It never has, never will. Irrespective of what your ego thinks, your story doesn't count. Now, number two, and this one's particularly pertinent for the past few years. This is the bandwagon effect. This is the notion of people jumping onto an idea because they think it is popular, it is widespread. And they do this irrespective of the evidence for or against this thing that they've leapt on. The classic example over the past, let's say 2 years, are NFTs. People paid literally millions of dollars for a JPEG of a gorilla. Those JPEGs are now worth about 8 cents. But because they thought they were a thing and they were carried along by the hype of them, they did stupid things. And you always have to remember, one of the ways I teach is a very Socratic method. I ask questions of people. But to paraphrase Socrates, just because everybody thinks it's a good idea doesn't actually mean it is a good idea. So the notion that you're going to bet your house on a JPEG or a GIF of an ape is probably not the most sensible thing to do. Yes, I know you think it's popular. I know you think it's a good idea. But there is a little bit of a paradox in this. And the paradox is that trend trading or trend following requires you to jump on trends that are powered by other people. So there is a nuance to this that you need to be aware of. But the unfortunate thing is most people don't see that nuance. They don't see that difference. They equate this notion of, say, let's use a current example, trading lithium stocks over the past 3 years, which were subject to their own bull market and which had a wide underpinning of support, versus buying non-fungible tokens, which did not have a widespread notion of support, were an outgrowth of the crypto cult and a flow on from that. And there is a distinction between the two. And this distinction is subtle. And again, just because everyone thinks it's a good idea doesn't necessarily mean it is, which means you have to do the hardest of all things, and that is to keep your own counsel. In trading, it's almost as if you have to wear blinkers and you see what you want to see and you discard what everybody else sees. But more importantly, you discard what everybody else tells you they are seeing, because that's an irrelevancy, because they're not you and they're not trading your system and your ideas. Oh, one of my favorites, confirmation bias. This one is self-explanatory. It is that notion that people don't seek out opinions that differ from theirs. They seek out opinions that are the same. Because what we want is this notion of reinforcement. We feel better when we're not standing out there by ourselves. And confirmation bias does this. And the problem with modern markets and modern social media is they're wonderful echo chambers. It's an intriguing thing. If you look up one thing on your phone, doesn't matter what it is. I looked up washing baskets for sale a few weeks ago. My phone is now flooded with washing baskets for sale around the world. Tips on how to use your washing basket. New brilliant ideas for a washing basket. Washing baskets are the new boom market. That's a function of the algorithm that drives the search engine. And unfortunately, it does a brilliant job of locking in on this notion of confirmation bias. We very rarely look for evidence that contradicts our views. Even coming from my academic background in research, you see it there. You would think that scientists are very logical, very dispassionate, and are wedded to the scientific method. But a lot of them are not. They're like everybody else. They have an ego. And confirmation bias acts to defend our ego.
And I wonder whether it's also with the bandwagon effect and confirmation bias working together from an evolutionary biology perspective, because we were organized in tribes back in the caves and we felt safe in groups. So to be an individual, to stand out, to be separate, usually either meant death or some sort of ostracism, not only for yourself, but also your family. So a lot of these biases are down so deep that we can't even detect, because we are the modern human and they come from that very tribal evolutionary biology basis.
And that's the thing, they're coded. And because they're hard-coded, they're very, very difficult to see. It takes a great deal to step out of yourself and ask yourself the simple question, what was my role in that decision? Not what was the role of my psychology? What was my role? What did I do that prompted that chain of events? And irrespective of the interaction that you're having, be it with the market, be it with other people, whatever, you always play a role. And unless you can stand back and have a look at what your role is, then you're forever going to be caught by these echo chambers, caught by this notion that you seek out people that agree with you, as opposed to people who disagree with you and who might have a valid point of view. In fact, their point of view, and I'll talk about this later on, actually might be more valid than yours. And that might occur because their information source is superior. It might be that they have more control over their own emotions than you, so they can see clearly, whereas you actually can't. Internet forums are full of hindsight bias. Hindsight bias is this revision mirror effect. It is that notion of, well, I knew that was going to happen all along. And traders do this all the time when they look at charts. And you see this in groups that are sort of technically based. And unfortunately, there are groups around that are technically based that never trade, but they know everything about what had happened. And of course, they predicted it. But of course, they're still living at home with their mother and driving a 1976 Corolla. Their predictive skills don't extend to actually placing a trade. This notion of I knew it all along. But the problem is, unless you've actually taken some sort of action on what you knew was going to happen all along, you're really just a loudmouth spectator. The Americans have a wonderful expression, and it's called Monday morning quarterback. And it is this notion that everybody is an expert about the game that was played on the weekend and what should have happened. And it's this terrible form of prospective analysis and error. And look, we all do it. It just happens when you, it's one of those things where you see somebody go through a red light or something, you go, I knew they were going to do that. Well, you may or may not have known that. But what you're merely doing is backfilling. And traders do it all the time. We look at charts and go, I knew it was going to break out there. That's good. How many did you buy? None. Well, then your opinion's worthless, sport. All that matters is what you act on. And that's it. Trading is an action sport. In some ways, it's a contact sport. But you've actually got to act. I mean, talking about trading is pointless. And I know that is the favourite topic of the internet, is talking about trading. And if you pop yourself onto social media, pop yourself onto Twitter. And when I was preparing these, I had a look at a few of the Twitter accounts of people I follow. And particularly on 2 sessions ago when the Dow collapsed, it was full of people going, I knew that was going to happen. Well, were you short? No. Well, then you really didn't know, did you? You were just making it up. But this is one of my favourites. And it's also a favourite of people who sell charting packages. When you get a charting package, it comes with hundreds of indicators. And there's hundreds more you can download from the internet. The sort of the world is your oyster for downloading indicators for irrespective of the charting package you have. And traders spend their lifetime in search of the perfect indicator. Why do they do that? Because it is the perception that indicators give you control. If 2 indicators gives me some control, 4 will give me twice as much control. 8 will give me twice as much again. And you see this all the time with traders. It is this notion that they somehow have control and they can't understand that A, they have no control, but also B, a lot of the results they're seeing are actually random and they have nothing to do with the system they've applied. They have nothing to do with the indicators they've applied. It is simply this joy of the law of large numbers and random systems occasionally throwing up a result that suits you. And this is a phenomena that it is widespread across all human endeavours. If you look at, there's a wonderful study on lottery winners, and it looks at the largest prize pools. Most lotteries operate with numbers from 1 to 40. Guess which prize pools have the largest single winner? Numbers above 31. Why? Nobody has a birthday on the 38th of August. People pick birthdays because they think picking birthdays somehow gives them control.
And the other thing with lottery winners as well is that you're more likely as the neighbour of a lottery winner to go bankrupt, because that bandwagon effect, you're wanting to keep up with your neighbour that is expending all of their lottery winnings. They are buying boats and cars and houses, and hey, why can't I do that? I am the same as them. Why can't I do that? And before you know it, there are financial difficulties. So it's interesting to see the interplay of some of these biases as well.
Again, a bias that applies to trading is not domain specific. It applies across domains. And so if someone is stupid in one area, and that's a global stupidity they have, it's highly likely that stupidity applies somewhere else. There's simply no way around that. Think of it this way in simple terms. If someone has a prick at work, they're probably a prick at home. There's no delineation between the two for them. That is their base programming. It's just the way they are. If someone is illogical and emotional with the market, they're bound to be illogical and emotional with every financial decision. And in fact, that would probably extend to every decision they make. And the most important point I want to make about this is the last sentence here. Tomorrow remains opaque. Irrespective of what people tell you, you cannot predict markets. And intriguingly, the people who always say they can predict markets are always the poorest, because somehow their predictions never seem to work. It's a little bit like these religious cults who are constantly predicting the end of the world. To my knowledge, and the fact that I can look out my window and see that the sun is up, none of them have come true yet, unless we're all remarkably delusional and it has happened. This is the notion that the future remains completely foreign to us. It is a foreign country, and it always remains that way. But that's the cool thing about trading, because if tomorrow was not opaque, there'd be no risk in the system. If there's no risk in the system, there's no reward. You can have a riskless trade called the bank account. You get nothing, but you deserve nothing because you've taken no risk. It's really that simple. And a lot of these are simple. They appear initially complex, but when you sit down and look at yourself and you look at the decisions you make and the things that impact upon you, they become quite simple. Now, hyperbolic discounting is a very, very fancy way of saying, I want it today as opposed to tomorrow. And it's a little bit like these delayed gratification studies that have been done over the years. It is this notion that we place this tremendous importance on rewards we get sooner, the thing that we get now, this immediate gratification, and much lesser value on rewards that are distant or that we perceive to be distant. In part, this is why it is very, very difficult for people to stick to any form of lifestyle change, because the benefits from a lifestyle change are off in the future, and it is difficult for us to conceive of the future. It's a little bit like gyms. Gyms initially, when I started going, would have programs that lasted for 6 months. Then they became 3 months. Then they became 10 weeks.
It's a 2-minute gym workout.
And you just go, what the hell? Everything takes time. It is just the way it is. And this is the thing. This is a chart of Chalice. And Chalice was one of the great performers of 2 years ago. You can see the initial breakout in 2020. She broke out from around the 20-cent mark. There will be people, and along the bottom I plotted volume. There will be people who bought it at 20 cents and sold it at 25 and thought they were really clever because they could not conceive of this notion of trend following and the fact that the stock would eventually top out at around the 950 mark. In simple terms, for every buyer there is a seller. And there will be people who manage to trade Chalice mining during this uptrend and lose money because they could not foresee of a time in the future when things would be different. They simply had, and whilst I don't want to use the same expression that the moronic crypto bros use of weak hands, most people have weak hands when it comes to sitting with a position. If it goes even vaguely sideways, or they get what they presume to be a tremendous reward, they turn to water and they drop the position like a hot spud, if you will tolerate me mixing metaphors there. And this is the key thing. You don't get wealthy by buying a share at 20 and selling it at 25. It's just not the way it works. Because once you add in churn, opportunity cost, and admittedly brokerage is now cheap, but it still costs, you miss out on these sorts of moves because no one can conceive of holding a position. And this only took a year. There are some positions that will trend gently for 2 and 3 years, but people will get antsy and go, well, I've made 10%, I get nothing in the bank, I'm doing really well. Well, that sounds really good until 3 years later you look back and you've left a multiple of that on the table. And this is I suppose you would call this the foundation of this statement. The old adage of you will never go broke taking a profit. But strangely enough, this statement accurately describes how you will go broke, because people who take profits early coincidentally let their losses run, or they simply do not make enough to overcome the inevitable losses that hit the account. Oh, the positive outcome bias, which again is one of those subtle ones that sneaks up on people because we're unaware of its existence. And this one is we're particularly blind to this. And it is this notion that we overestimate this idea that we will get a positive outcome from something we've done. If there was no positive outcome bias, nobody would buy a lottery ticket because
And is this the same as an optimism bias, or is this just for one particular event?
This is largely applied to singular events. It's generally applied to lotteries because the odds of winning a lottery run anywhere between, depending on which one it is, between 1 in 7 million and 1 in 50 odd million. They're not really good odds, which is why the payoff is so high, because the risk is almost 100%. It is effectively 100% for the vast majority of the population. But people would not become involved in lotteries if we didn't have this positive outcome bias, if we did not think that, well, our numbers have to come up. And the advertising is built around that notion of, when will your numbers come up? Well, probably never, but they don't actually add that bit in because that would
Defeat the purpose.
That would put people off, wouldn't it? And we think that in trading, this is Sayona, which was one of the lithium stocks, or lithium-associated stocks. When people bought Sayona, they could not conceive of the fact that they bought it at 12.5. It went to near 40, and it came back to 12.5. They could not conceive that that might happen. All they could conceive of was the fact that it might go to 40. Well, yes, the job's only half done then, because now how do you manage that? How do you change that positive expectation you have into a realistic expectation? Because what people do is they look at this and go, well, I bought it at 12.5. It's gone to 40. 3.5-fold increase, remarkable increase. If I hold it again for the same period of time, it will go from 40 to, let's say, $1.40. And then it will go to $6 something. And that they can't conceive of this notion that, no, what it will do is come straight back down and hit you. And unfortunately, there will be people who bought this stock, let's say 12.5, rode it all the way up, saw their account balloon, and then rode it all the way down. And it's not necessarily a technical issue. The technical issue is brought about by this bias that you can't conceive of anything going wrong. You need to hope for the best but prepare for the worst. So when you buy a lottery ticket, yes, it's fine to have that 5 or 10 minutes of psychological relief about dreaming of what you did, but you really shouldn't go and quit your job based upon the presumption that you are going to win that night, because that's not going to happen. This is probably one of the oldest and most commonly mentioned in this notion of biases that traders suffer from. It is this notion of the gambler's fallacy. And the gambler's fallacy is, we believe that random outcomes, like tossing a coin. So if I toss a coin 5 times in a row and I bet on heads, the belief is that it's more likely to come up heads on the 6th time. No, it's not. It's a random event. It's simply each event is isolated from the past event. There's no carry forward probability. It doesn't, probability is not additive as you move through this succession of trials. Case in point, this is statistics for a trading system that I just snipped at random from the internet. And the interesting thing is, when looking at this, they have the percentage of winning trades. That percentage of winning trades is constant. What that means is that on any given trade, you have a 47.41% chance of being successful. It doesn't matter whether the previous 10, 50, 100 trades were either winners or losers. That probability remains fixed. Yes, Wins and losses do occur in clusters. That's simply a function of the law of large numbers within systems. That's a natural phenomenon. But that does not break this notion of statistics being immutable and having no memory for these events.
So you can't really say, I'm due for a win.
You've preempted my next slide. Only moronic sporting coaches believe they are due for a win. You hear this all the time. You will have a sporting side that is getting malleted week after week after week. And the coach goes, we're due for a win. No, you're not. You're shit. You're going to get malleted next week as well. That's just the way it works, mate. Here's an introductory course on probability for you, because that's the way the world works. Trading is the same. You can get absolutely belted 10 times in a row. It does not mean that the 11th trade has more chance of being a winner, because your system is dictated by the statistics that cover it, and they're immutable. They don't change. They're fixed. Now, they may alter when you make alterations to the system, but that's a global alteration. That's something completely different. That's not a function of the number of trades that have gone before. Naive realism is this notion that my view of the world is the only correct one, and then everybody else's view is incorrect. Now, in my case, that's true.
I know we were going to go there. Oh, my goodness.
You're always wrong. I come back to this. This is a piece of research I snipped from Goldman Sachs. The person who wrote this is absolutely convinced that their worldview is correct, everyone else is incorrect, and they're educating them. My question is, and it comes back to this notion of narrative fallacy. How do you know your view of the world is correct? Because all our views are idiosyncratic. We all see different things. It's like this notion of colour. If you ask a male how many colours there are, they'll go white, red, green, blue, black. Ask a female interior designer and they'll go, there's 87 shades of blue. No, there's blue and there's blue. That's it. Any other colour is not blue. And it is this idiosyncratic nature of the way we see the world. We all see the world differently, but you have to have this notion of variant perception. This notion that other people have different views to you. And it loops back to this notion of narrative fallacy. Their view might actually be the right one. So you have to understand that different perceptions have different outcomes, and you need to be aware that other people think differently. They see the world differently. And in trading, you might think that it's all go for a given stop. The market and everybody else might have a variant perception and say, no, it's not. Their view is wrong. Sorry, their view is right. Yours is incorrect. And you need to do something about that. Most people don't, though. Most people cling to their view, again, for reasons of ego defensiveness. And the final one, overconfidence. This is, again, we come back to this notion of trading presents us with a paradox. You have to be confident enough to do trading. You have to be confident enough to think that you can go out there and that it's not that you're competing with the market, but rather that your perceptions, abilities, and all the things you bring are sufficient to enable you to be profitable. The great problem is that most people completely overestimate their abilities or the accuracies of what they can do. And I'll give you a case in point. The case in point dates back to the pandemic. And that dates back to the time when we would catch up and we would go to the park and we would watch blokes who'd never kicked a football for 30 years try and kick a football. And it was this wonderful mixture of torn hamstrings, footballs in the face, and nut shots, because they had completely overestimated their ability to do something. It's a little bit like you'll have a barbecue and the Olympics are on, and there'll be some event that's extraordinary, like gymnastics. But gymnastics is conducted by people who are superhuman. They're not like the rest of us. And you'll get the most physically incompetent bloke there go, 6 weeks I could be doing that. And you go, mate, you can barely get off the couch. I don't think you're going to be hurling yourself through the air like that little girl. But again, there's that paradox. You've got to be confident enough to do it, but realise that confidence alone doesn't actually get you through. And this is the thing about all these biases, and this is something I'll finish on, is that confidence doesn't displace biases, it actually masks them. And it masks them from the most important person, and that's the individual trader. So if you're overly cocky about the way you trade and overly optimistic about the results you think you will get, and I understand why that occurs. Even LinkedIn is full of people who put up fake equity curves. And that, for those who don't know, an equity curve simply tracks your profitability. And these equity curves start on the bottom left and they finish on the top right, and they are linear. These people never have a drawdown, and they post their trade summaries down the bottom and they go, number of losing trades in a row, 1. So that means you've had 1 losing trade. Oh, yeah, that's all that ever happens to me. Utter nonsense, sport. Utter nonsense. Now, people absorb that as being true, and they absorb that as being real, which is problematic in the extreme because it grants them a sense of overconfidence. The same occurs when people buy trading packages. They think, all I need is this trading package, and then they think, all I need is this indicator. When in actual fact, all they need to do is take a step back and go and ask a simple question. Most things in life can be solved by asking questions. And the question is, what was my role? What was I thinking? What was I feeling? And how did that impact the end result? And once you ask those questions, things become so much clearer.
Chris, I've loved hearing about your view with bias. And the good thing is that everybody listening to this show, you are educating yourself, you are questing, you are striving. And we do know that research does suggest the longer you can stay in the arena, the more you can work on your own emotional mindset, the more likely you are to discover how to do this and get this game to absolutely fly in formation for you. I'm very excited that next week you'll hear me interview Bill Moore from fasttrading.academy. Now, Bill has become a personal friend since that interview. I interviewed him just before Christmas, and Bill has just opened up an entire world of gaming to me. He is on the scoreboard, the international scoreboard for backgammon, chess, and poker. A whole new area for me to investigate. But in that episode, you'll learn what's an edge and how to determine it, what is probability and how you define it in the markets, and black swan events and how traders manage them. So tune in next week to Talking Trading. And Christopher Tate, any parting words?
Oh, hopefully I'll be back for the 800th episode.
Good move. Happy trading.